Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself. We're your hosts.
I'm Scott Copeland.
I'm Rivka Brahma.
An ancient silver scroll, a long-lost tomb, a famous archaeologist, and a 13-year-old boy. I know this sounds like the opening of a Hollywood thriller, but it is the true story of a discovery that changed our understanding of the Bible forever. To find this mystery, we're going to walk south from the Old City. We're going to leave the Jaffa Gate and head along the ridge, down the hill, towards what's called the shoulder of the Hinnom Valley, Ketef Hinnom.
Ketef Hinnom today is a very quiet spot next to St. Andrew's Scottish Church, but 2,600 years ago, it was the frontier of the dead. For the late Professor Gabriel Barkay, who recently passed away, this site was a geographical ruler. In the ancient world, the dead lived apart from the living because burials were outside the city walls. The location of a cemetery tells us exactly where the city ended at any given time. And as the time went on, the city borders sunk and stretched. So basically, we knew if the dead are living there, that's the end of the city.
So the finds that Barkay provided by digging at Gabriel Hinnom, at the Hinnom shoulder, it revealed a series of elite 7th century BCE tombs. Now, this was important, among other things, because it challenged two major schools of thought about Jerusalem and Jerusalem's growth and the size of the city in ancient times. On the one hand, the minimalists who said, the Bible, it's a fairy tale. The city was simply a village, and everything the Bible says about kings and towers and palaces and great wealth, it's just fantasy. But when we take a look at excavations, like the excavations at Gabriel Hinnom, another story is revealed. Now, it might not be the story of the maximalists who believe that basically every word in the Bible is true and eventually can be proven historically. But like most things, it's complicated. It's somewhere in between. But Barkay's work at the shoulder of the Hinnom Valley really provided a more complete, more complex picture of ancient Jerusalem that in many ways gave a context to Jerusalem during the First Temple period.
Archaeology is often a mix of intense and detailed science, and sometimes pure luck. In 1979, Barkay was excavating Cave 24. It's a rock-cut family burial chamber. To understand these tombs, you must imagine a stone bench where the body was laid. Beneath it was a pit where after a year the bones were moved to.
So this architecture was very much part of the physical reality that the Bible talks about in the text. And so the phrase in the Bible, quote, gathered his bones or her bones up to their ancestors or to their people. For example, Genesis 25:8, which describes the death of the patriarch Abraham. This custom of burying, allowing the flesh to rot away, and then gathering up the bones and collecting them for secondary burial. This is what was revealed, uncovered in Cave 24, reflecting the very verses of the biblical text.
Right. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. In Hebrew we say, Ne'esaf el avotav.
And so the archaeology of Ketef Hinnom, it shows that this wasn't just poetry. It was a ritualistic act. Abraham was laid in a family vault to join his ancestors. The families of Jerusalem used these repository pits to literally mingle the bones of generations. It reveals a culture where death was not an individualistic end, but was a communal transition.
This ancient practice actually resonates now more because the idea of gathering the bones into shared family space helps us with the challenges that we face today as modern communities confront growing environmental pressures and the limits of available land and burial. There's a real burial crisis in Jerusalem that we are dealing with, and some people have found several different solutions to it. One of them is basically this old way of using secondary burial in order to save space, basically.
And so you have to picture the construction of these kinds of burial shelves, these burial structures. They're multi-layered, commode or floors.
Right.
And they can serve space by stacking the graves vertically.
So they're trying to push that, but it's very hard to convince people who are very traditional when it comes to burial and death to try out different ways of doing this. But in one of the communities outside of Jerusalem, a religious kibbutz, actually, they're trying to go back to this first temple period custom, allowing the body to decompose naturally and then placing the bones in a communal family pit. This method is dramatically reducing, obviously, the land using burials.
And so the place that Rivka mentioned, the religious kibbutz of Kibbutz Yavna, they're one of the places in Israel where they've begun to reintroduce this practice of burying in floors in commode, but you see it in much larger municipal cemeteries as well in a bit of a different way. But even at the major Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of Jerusalem, traveling from Jerusalem towards Tel Aviv before you even get to Mivaseret Zion, you do see today the use of burial in shelves piled vertically as opposed to burial directly into the earth.
Barkay thought, let's go back to Professor Barkay, the hero of this story. He thought that Cave 24 was empty, having been picked clean by looters. This is a huge archaeological thing in Israel, basically. People who know the land, who loot it and understand that there's money that can be gained by selling things in the black market. So he thought this cave was empty. However, he was working with a group of teenage volunteers. Among them was a 13-year-old boy named Natan Wasserman. Natan was energetic, restless, and bored by slow brushing the dust. We don't want to give him labels, but, you know, a classic, maybe some ADHD kid. To keep him out of the trouble, Barkay sent him to the pit to clean what appeared to be a solid stone floor. Natan began banging on the floor with a hammer and felt a hollow thud. He broke through the layer of what turned out to be a collapsed ceiling from the 7th century BC. Underneath that rubble lay a time capsule that had been sealed for 2,600 years.
It's funny, this example of Natan Wasserman and the accidental uncovering of the treasures of the Hinnom Valley, it reminds me of all kinds of stories that a lot of times on Israeli news, the last few moments, you have usually the human interest story and the sports, and then, of course, the weather.
Right.
And a lot of times in the kind of the human interest corner, they'll bring a story of, this school group was excavating at Hatzor in the Galilee, or outside the walls of the old city, or in the shadow of the Temple Mount, or, whatever it might be. And a young girl or a young boy, and they uncovered A, B, and C. It's really quite insane. But it does say something about our thirst as Israelis to base who we are in many ways on our connection with the past. And maybe that has to do with the Zionist movement bringing back the Jewish people to the historic land of Israel, and a bit of still today, so many years later, still a bit of insecurity about who we are maybe, and this desire to prove ourselves. And every coin and every Hasmonean ring, and every Hebrew inscription, and every broken shard becomes part of that story of, hey, we were here. And that's part of the narrative used to justify we are here now.
I used to dream of, finding something really, really important as a kid. Alas, never happened. But Natan Wasserman actually did.
Right. And hey, there's still a chance. You got to get out there.
Right. Inside of, though, that hidden chamber that Wasserman found, they found a treasure. Gold jewelry, rare glass, and 40 iron arrowheads. Grim witness to the Babylonian siege of 586 BCE. These artifacts ground the development of the biblical text in a real historical context of trauma and survival.
The crown jewels of this find were 2 tiny corroded rolls of silver, no larger than a cigarette butt, than of your first knuckle. It took 3 years for the Israel Museum to unroll them. When they finally did, they recognized the priestly blessing, Numbers 6, verses 24 through 26. It's actually the oldest biblical text ever discovered. The silver scrolls of the Hinnom shoulder are not silver cases with parchment scrolls inside, as you might expect. They're actually tiny scrolls where the text is inscribed onto the silver. And to see the original ones, you can visit the gorgeous campus of the Israel Museum and take a look in the archaeology wing.
The priestly blessing of Birkat Kohanim, found on the silver scrolls at the Ketef Hinnom, is one of the most sacred texts in human history. Below is the text as it appears in the Bible, and an example of its continuous use in Jewish traditional. This might sound familiar to you.
For sure. So in the English, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord deal kindly and graciously with you. May the Lord bestow his favor upon you and grant you peace.
יברכך אדוני וישמרך, יאר אדוני פניו אליך ויחנך, יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום.
The discovery at Ketef Hinnom, at the Hinnom shoulder, proves that these words have been in continuous use in Jewish prayer for over 2,600 years, remaining words of meaning that resonate all through the ages.
So Birkat Kohanim, the priestly blessing, might sound familiar for you because it's done in synagogues every Shabbat. Nesiat Kapayim, it's called, the lifting of the hands. In many Jewish communities, the descendants of the biblical priest, Kohanim, ascend to the front of the congregation. They face the congregation during the repetition of the Amidah prayer, and they drape their prayer shawls, their talitot, over their heads and hands, extending their fingers in a very specific formation to recite these exact words, and they bless the community.
The blessing also raises questions about identity and spiritual authority. How does someone know that they're of a priestly family? The second temple was destroyed 2,000 years ago. The first temple was destroyed 2,600 years ago.
How do you know you're a Kohen? In many communities, priestly status is preserved through family tradition and surnames, like the Cohens, the Khans, or Maze, Ben Zera Aaron Kohen, like the descendant of Aaron Kohen. So many people know from their family they have a tradition of being a Kohen, being a priest.
And like all things Jewish, different streams and different communities, they respond differently to this whole idea of priesthood. Some embrace it as a very meaningful link to the past, while others see it as outdated. It's a custom related to hierarchies of religious power. It has to do with ancient times and largely irrelevant to modern Jewish life. And again, like most of these questions in Jewish life, at least in my opinion, good that we have this diversity, good that we have this ongoing debate.
I think later in the years also, priesthood has become synonymous with corruption. Basically, no one eats meat. Everybody's working their hands in the field, but these priests are having sacrifices day after day in the temple. And obviously, we know later on in the Hasmonean period that priesthood was bought by money. So priesthood and corruption, not everybody agrees that this tradition of being a priest should be remaining. But we also know that there are people in Jerusalem that are still today working on when the temple we will rebuild, knowing who and what is going to serve in the temple as a priest and as a Levite.
And then there's the distinctive hand gesture used by the priesthood that we still see in some of the synagogue settings that Rivka mentioned. And so it's the splitting of the hand, the third finger and the fourth finger with a gap in the middle, the thumb outstretched, and looking a little bit like the letter Shin, perhaps the name Shaddai, one of the biblical names of God. And those who are into pop culture, so of course you know Leonard Nimoy, who played Mr. Spock in Star Trek, Zichrono Livracha, adapted this hand position as the Vulcan salute or blessing after seeing it in a synagogue in Boston as a child. It's a striking example of how ancient Jewish ritual moments can echo far beyond their original settings, and it raises issues about Jewish representation in pop culture over the years.
years later, a few months ago, when Emily Damari was released from captivity, came out showing off her mutilated hand that was shot at the October 7th attack, making her hand gesture as an act of symbol, as an act of victory.
Yeah, beautiful example. In my study, next to the bookcase, among the pictures there is a picture of the hand of John Lee Hooker. Zichrono livracha. John Lee was one of the great fathers of blues following the Second World War. He was part of the comeback of the blues in the late 1980s. And there's a famous picture of him with his hand outstretched exactly in the priestly blessing. It's only a picture of the hand. And so you see not only the blessing, intended or not, but the beautiful grooves of his skin from years and years of being a master guitar player. And so when we ask, the question of who do we want to be blessed by, so that adorns my wall in my study.
That's a great question. Who do you want to be blessed by? And blessings in general in our own life. Who do we bless? How many times do we bless? And I think Shabbat and the priestly blessing sometimes brings us a moment of blessing and thinking about it, but also that tradition that we have in our own house that we bless our kids every Friday. We put our hands over their heads and say a blessing. Even when they're far away, we try to do it long distance.
Yeah, and so there's this sense of the continuity. I mean, think about, what were these silver scrolls originally used for? Some say maybe it was a kind of an amulet. Just like today, someone might wear a Magen David as a bracelet or on a chain of mezuzah. It was this idea of kameah, of an amulet. Was it to ward off evil? Was it to bring good luck? But again, I think it really shows that today and then, we're not so different. The technology is different. Our basic life conditions are different. But in terms of like our desire to feel safe, feel secure, find comfort, grant meaning to who we are, so the silver scrolls and the ways that we do it today are very, very much connected and form another line of continuity, making memory real life.
So the idea that those priestly blessing scrolls, those tiny little things, were used as an amulet, as a kameah. Maybe someone used it as a jewelry. We don't really know, but the idea of kameah is a very vivid thing still today. People who know me personally, I'm the person who is the first one to say tfu tfu tfu, chamsa chamsa chamsa, knock on woods, whenever anything well or good is happening, to realize that there is an idea of evil eye. I'm a very rational person, and yet I can't shake this off. And the idea that there's a charm or something that protects you is something that I deeply connect to.
No, definitely. I mean, I tend to be very, I think, rational in most things, and try to be careful about what I claim I believe in or don't believe in. And sometimes these rituals do seem kind of simple or just superstition. But I also recognize, and for me personally, they're also deeply human. They connect us to family, as you mentioned, to heritage, to generations of people who they tried to create a circle of protection for themselves around the ones they loved in a world that, for sure, in ancient times was very unpredictable. But let's face it, in our old world today, you wake up in the morning, sometimes you're not really sure what's happening around you, and having something you can hold on to and say, hey, this gives me a little bit more faith and confidence. Ma tov, it's all good. It's all good.
So tfu tfu tfu, chamsa chamsa to us all.
Tfu tfu tfu.
But let's get back to Ketef Hinnom. The sophistication of the tombs and the presence of these scrolls support the idea that the Bible emerged from a literal, organized state with the capacity to preserve tradition.
And this takes us back to this argument between so-called minimalists and so-called maximalists. Was Jerusalem a large imperial city during the time of the First Temple, or was it a small village? And the tombs and the types of finds, the sophisticated cultural artifacts that were found, for example, in Cave 24, they point to a city that, well, it definitely wasn't a village, because this is not stuff that would be created in a small agricultural setting. Does it point to an enormous empire? Not necessarily. it points to something in the middle. And I think, again, the archaeology is great because it always brings back these questions and points to, hey, with all the stories and all the narratives, let's look at what's actually on the ground and in the ground.
But archaeology could be also a very political thing, like we keep maybe alluding to. The idea that you're looking for something that you already know what you're looking for is very dangerous in the scientific field. And we do see that archaeology in Israel is used sometimes to prove a point, to negate an idea or a narrative. And when we go out with our tourists, when we visit places, we really want to try and look at it with fresh eyes, look at the artifacts and say, what does this mean to me? And there are heated debates between archaeologists in Israel. It's not just an Indiana Jones walking around caves, but serious study that you have to prove your idea and your finding and where they're rooted in history.
Oh, in that sense, I think that's even a question of how we present things to people. And so the questions of certain streams in our tradition suggest, some scholars hold, the artifacts make some people think. I mean, I think you have to a little bit frame things with that note of skepticism so that you're not heard as saying, this is the way it is, this is the only way to understand it.
So what happened to Natan Wasserman from the story of Cave 24, this 13-year-old restless boy? Wasserman grew up to become Professor Natan Wasserman, a world-renowned expert in ancient Assyrian studies and archaeology at Hebrew University. The boy who pounded the floor of the Judean tomb grew up to be a man who decodes the ancient text of a very Mesopotamian culture that once loomed over Jerusalem.
I mean, again, his story, like we've mentioned, it reflects something so uniquely Israeli, and that's about learning the land and about archaeology as education for identity. We mentioned it's very common for school kids to be out there in digs, and that goal of showing people that history is not mainly in books or only in books, it's all around us, waiting to be discovered.
By putting a hand shovel in a child's hand, history moves from being abstract to being real. Natan was touching a physical link to a prayer his ancestors used to find comfort when Jerusalem was still standing in biblical times, 2,500 years ago.
Ketef Hinnom may teach us that the historical Bible is not an all-or-nothing proposition. Archaeology, the study of history, reveals a Jerusalem that was larger and more sophisticated than many critics believe. It also reveals a text that's centuries older than scholars once thought. And it reveals a culture where the past is never truly buried.
Archaeology and history are not only about the past, they're about us and reminding us that while technologies change and customs shift through the centuries, there are still strong lines of continuity. Whether we are looking at ancestors who were cave dwellers or the First Temple Jerusalem aristocracy, we found the same threads in our stories and prayers, our struggles and battles, and our search for who we are. We also know and realize that leaving things, stuff behind is important. So sometimes when people ask you to declutter, think again.
We want to dedicate this episode to Professor Gabi Barkay, who passed away this January. His colleagues at the Armstrong Institute of Biblical Archaeology shared in his memory that Gabi was, quote, a prolific scholar and beloved teacher. He helped uncover Jerusalem's hidden treasures. He raised generations of students and shared his love of Jerusalem with many in Israel and throughout the world. May his memory be a blessing.
Amen. Gabi suggested that we do not dig to prove the Bible. We dig to hear the voices of the people who lived in it. At Ketef Hinnom, thanks to a naughty boy with a hammer and a professor who always saw potential in dust, those voices and that ancient blessing are finally being heard again.
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. My name is Uri Feinberg, and I'm a tour educator, and I work as an integral piece of the J Square family, and I'm very excited to be with you. But more importantly, I am married to Meryl, and we have 3 daughters, and we live in the city of Modi'in, about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Now, I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about the Israel Museum. Now, I know you just encountered these incredible finds of the amulets that had that integral part of our own story going back to antiquity. But I'd like to take us on a different path throughout the museum, actually to my favorite spot in the museum. And while I arrive at the museum more often with groups than on my own, I always make sure to direct the group to this particular place. As you enter into the museum, that first entryway from the new museum, as it was recreated and renovated back 15 years ago, allows the visitor to go up the elongated gradual incline past Rodin and past the mosaics from 5th century Jewish homes in the Galilee, not to mention Oliver Eliasson's incredible 300 slat, every color you can imagine when the rainbow comes. Just up a little bit more, you find yourself in the Cardo, that main throughway of the museum. If you wanted, just turn your back a bit and you're through the archaeology department, and you can go see that same amulet you just discussed. If you turn to the left up a few stairs, you find yourself going through Jewish birth, marriage, life, the whole gauntlet of our Jewish identity. But if you went straight, you would find yourself in the fine arts wing. However, the first place you would encounter in that fine arts is the contemporary Israeli art piece of the museum. And that is what draws me. Now, the truth is that what actually stops me from entering is the sentry-like figure waiting right there at the entrance to greet the visitor. Now, the truth is that he seems a little off. I say he because the figure is called Nimrod. Nimrod is this 4-foot Nubian red sandstone taken from Petra piece, a sculpture that was created by Yitzhak Danziger in 1939. I say that he is off because he's not turned towards looking at the visitor. His gaze is actually off outside through the window, as if not a care in the world. And he's saying to us, you want to see me? You come to me. But the truth is, I'm getting ahead of myself, because Danziger creates this piece not in a vacuum. Now, while his intention may not have been to create an iconic figure that would represent an entire movement, maybe even us as a evolving people, he did. And he was part of a movement called the Canaanite movement. Now, of course, we all know about the early Zionists, and we know about the second Aliyah, and we know about these Jews who came to create the idea of the new Jew in an ancient land. And the Canaanite movement went to go ahead and take it even up a notch. And they said, we're going to challenge even this idea of this diaspora concept of what the Jew needs to be. And we're going to go back even farther within our biblical heritage, even before our biblical heritage. Now, the truth is, the name Nimrod is reflective of that character in the Bible that we know described as the great hunter. In our tradition, Nimrod represents the one who challenged God, this rebellious figure. Can you get where I'm going with this? Now, what the Canaanite movement said is we are not Jews of a biblical land. We are a territorial people. We are the ancient Hebrews. We are part of a Semitic clan that goes beyond the borders of our land. And therefore, this piece, which is bold, striking, has a gaze as if I am secure in my identity, and is naked. And as such, we clearly see this figure predates circumcision. And in that sense, this bold, confident figure is going to be, in my mind, a foundational stone, taltei mashma, as we say, a foundational stone in understanding the evolution of what it means to be an Israeli. Now, there's obviously much more that we can say about that, but you know what? Leave it at that, and I promise you, if you can find this figure, you will have more of a foundation on which to stand when you challenge yourself, just like I do, by the way, every single time I come. What am I doing here? And why do I care? Listen, I hope I get to see you the next time you come around on one of your J Square adventures. And, well, have a wonderful time.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's jsquaredadventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures.
And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Rivka.
I'm Scott. See you soon at J Squared Adventures, Wandering Jews.